What is going on with the Big 12? Or is it even going to be called the Big 12 anymore? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I am your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, as always, a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Remember to use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. We had something completely different planned for this episode, which I'm going to be honest, reminds me a lot of last year. We'd have something planned, some realignment news would drop, we scrap the entire episode and we talk about it. This week, partially glad that something happened, Nick, because we were going to talk the Florida UCF news of night game, national TV, which is exciting, and we'll have time to talk about that maybe today, maybe another episode. Last week was fun. Had Steven Leonard on. It was really good to get some intel onto, UCF's recruiting and stuff, but guess what? This news that came out yesterday is directly going to affect UCF and the Big 12 Conference. But before we get started, how are you doing? Obviously, haven't seen you in a week or so, but finally back on the pod, and we are just a couple months away from the start of fall training camp. So it's getting closer. It's getting closer, I promise.
I always pick a great spot to make my return because, this was a bomb that really, I guess I would describe it. A bomb dropped here on the college athletics, but it's really gonna be just mostly college football that it impacts at this point. But yeah, big one happened out here, and UCF is obviously going to be really affected by this. So, yeah, I'm excited. There's a lot of layers to this conversation, I think.
There is, and that's why. Listen, again, we've been planning for the last 2 days that we're talking UCF Florida. This is going to be a 20-minute episode. We're going to talk about how many UCF fans are going to show up to this game, which I knew we disagreed with. So that was going to be a fun conversation, and I want to have it. I don't think it's going to be this episode because I'm assuming this is going to go 40-plus minutes, but we'll see. Let's get into it. Big 12, most likely, definitely likely, is not going to be the Big 12 conference anymore. In the new age of college football, Nick, it doesn't matter. Tradition does not matter. It's about how can you make me money? What can we do to increase revenue? And Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, is doing just that. We go back to him basically killing the Pac-12. It's not his fault, but getting the TV deal done before the Pac-12, taking maybe a little bit less money than the Big 12 could have made, to really screwing the Pac-12 over, not being able to get a deal done. Now you only have a Power 4. Now you are talking about using sponsors in a specific way to make more revenue for your conference. Obviously, the Big 12 is on the lowest of the 4 conferences as of right now when it comes to revenue. They're not making much lesser than the ACC. The ACC and the Big 12 are pretty even. But then you have the obvious juggernauts in the SEC and Big 10 making boatloads more than the bottom other 2. So what did Brett Yormark decide? Well, a lot of stuff was reported. We're going to get into private equity. I think that's a much longer conversation than the naming rights of the Big 12. So let's start with the naming rights. Brett McMurphy was really the one to drop the bomb on Action Network. If you want to go read the article, I'll link it down below. But he states the Big 12 Conference and Allstate are in discussions about selling the league's naming rights to the insurance giant, sources told the Action Network. The Allstate 12 Conference is the leading candidate for the new name, sources said, while the Big Allstate Conference has also been discussed. The multi-year deal could earn the league between $30 to $50 million annually to be divided among its 16 league members. League sources stress this is not yet a done deal between the Big 12 and Allstate. There's a lot more, but I feel like that's the brunt of the report. They also said that the Big 12 has been talking to another person or another company about naming rights that actually makes more than what Allstate is offering, but that the Big 12 and Allstate have been more in cahoots, more really getting something worked out. And again, we'll see if it happens. But Nick, this episode is going to be positive and negatives, right? I think we can look at positive and negatives from every single facet of this news. Brett Yormark is going to be something we talk about a lot this episode because he is the commissioner. He's the one really getting all of this done. What are your thoughts? I have my thoughts, and we're going to go into financials and all that stuff. But from the outskirt, this is the first time really that a conference will now kind of, most likely, I think we're safely assuming this thing's probably very close. If it won't be All-State, it'll be something else. What is your feeling of a conference being a very old and storied conference getting changed to a name like the All-State 12 Conference?
I don't care. Listen, college football has already told me they don't care about tradition. If you haven't gotten the point yet in the last 3 years. So why am I going to hold on to something like this? Like the Pac-12's dead. It's dead. The ACC is, just 2 members away from being dead. So, I mean, get used to it. Just get used to it. The whole point, I think, of the conversation today, and if you're a college football diehard, and, we all are, and you're all locked in on tradition and all that, like, it's slowly going to get taken away from you. It just is. And you have to get a little uncomfortable or get comfortable with the uncomfortableness of where college football and college athletics as a whole are going. And simply, it's adapt or die. Adapt or die. Like, we hear that saying a lot in the world as it continues to change. And the college athletic space is no different. So if it's not called the Big 12, like, who cares? Who cares? At this point, all these changes, like you talk about UCF really, being in the right place at the right time to get into the Big 12 when they did. I mean, that's to me the part we should be celebrating here of this whole thing. You'd rather UCF be in these discussions, obviously, and be affected by these things than be totally on the outside of it, because I do think there are good aspects to this that we're going to go over. But as it relates to the name, it doesn't have one bearing on me whatsoever.
Yeah, we talked about this, Nick, last year when realignment was going on, and we kind of looked from the outside in how the ACC, and I've said it, I will continue saying it, and I will be not celebrating, because I don't think celebrating is the right word. I don't want the ACC to die, but I will be glad that I kept to my bones and was right in however long it takes when the ACC is dead, because the ACC made a bad deal. They're doing everything they can to keep this conference together, but I said a year ago, that conference is dead on arrival. The Big 12, all they can do is do their best to become the clear-cut number 3. The clear-cut. Yeah. And to not get pushed aside by the top 2 conferences. Now, when it comes to the name, does it sound amazing? No. I think it sounds stupid as hell.
The All-State 12?
All-State 12 Conference sounds like, I don't even know what to make of that. Now, people online, again, to shed some light, the reason why they're keeping the 12 is because of the logo. Just to be very clear, I know a lot of people are like, why aren't they making it 16? Why? It's very simple. The Big 12 logo, specifically, is, what it looks like when you see it. And when you're doing something like this, like bringing in a sponsor like Allstate to potentially become the new naming sponsor of a conference, you need something that is familiar. Because if you make it the Allstate 16, then all of a sudden you're changing everything. You're changing everything from the previous Big 12 conference that maybe people will then forget or get confused. So the reason why it's going to be the Allstate 12 potentially is to keep the same logo. Now, let's go financials. First of all, I think Brett Yormark, Nick, and we'll get into it with the private equity stuff. We've applauded Brett Yormark since he's come in, to how he looks at the college football landscape, and he doesn't shy away from it. He takes it head on. So we'll applaud him and question him in certain facets in this episode. But when it comes to the naming rights, it's 30 to 50 million, Nick. I did the breakdown. I said, let's just say it's 50 million. Let's say each school, and we read in the article, we actually asked this before we started recording, is it going to the schools? Is some of it going to the Big 12? It would be going directly to the schools. So the money made from the naming rights would go directly to the schools. It's about $3 million if it's 50 million. And it said 30 to 50. So if you're looking from the low end, it's about 2.5, high end, 3 million per school for the 16. And again, that's the 16. Who knows in a year or two if the ACC stuff happens and the Big 12 takes 4 teams from the ACC. Is it worth it? That's my question. Is the $3 million a school per year annually, so $3 million a year at most, worth it in your eyes?
Yes.
Is this just something inevitable that you say, listen, it's inevitable, let's make a little bit extra money? Or is it, hey, like, should we actually be making this move for an extra $3 million?
The answer is yes, because regardless of what we might think from a traditional standpoint, it doesn't really matter anymore. Like I said, the can of worms has been opened, and it's gonna go to places that, you know, we probably don't even want to even envision, but it's happening faster. I mean, we didn't expect this to happen, but we're already made this leap. You have to understand that the Big Ten and the SEC, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. They have a stranglehold on college football right now. Let's just be completely frank about it. The amount of revenue that those two conferences are going to rake in over the next decade and so on, it's going to trump even the Big 12, which I would say was in a pretty good spot already, especially when you looked at where the ACC is for the future. You know, I think the Big 12 was already in a good spot, but like you said, to be a nice little 3, essentially. And I'm not saying the Big 12 is ever going to be on par on the standpoint of reputation, marketability, all those types of things at the SEC and the Big 10, because they're not. There's just not a dominant brand in the Big 12 anymore. And I think that's part of why these moves are happening, by the way, is, yes, I'm sure Brett Yormark is trying to be, you know, forward thinking and stuff. And like I said, adapt or die and all those things. And he's got a great business acumen and background. And so this stuff for him is probably second nature, but he lost, the Big 12 lost Texas and the Big 12 lost Oklahoma, which were their 2 biggest money makers, your 2 biggest star powers. Like, they left the conference. And so there's certainly a void there from a revenue standpoint. And so at this point, it really is a race to the top. How much money can you get in from a revenue standpoint? That's what college athletics is now. I know we may hate that, but it doesn't really matter. That's where it's going. So if it's 3 million here or 5 million there or 10 million, whatever it is, you have to do it. You just have to do it because you are in a chasing position right now when it comes to where you stand and where the other 2 conferences stand.
100%. And listen, I would have loved for it to be the Big 12 conference presented by Allstate. I understand why it's not, because I think the presented by always is looked at as significantly lesser, and nobody really remembers who a game or who a conference would be presented by. But at the end of the day, money's money. And for some of these schools, especially with the whole schools paying athletes directly and a lot of the question marks of can some of these schools afford to pay these athletes directly a base fee or a base salary, like for a school like UCF, a school like Kansas State, a lot of these schools, listen, if it's $3 million,
right,
you take it. You take the $3 million.
And by the way, just because it's called the All-State 12, it's Nobody's like Twitter. Call it that. It's what I'm saying. It's like Twitter and X. Who calls it X?
No one.
Who calls it X? We all call it Twitter. We're all going to call it the Big 12. I mean, I even thought of some other examples, like, you know, for example, I follow World Soccer. Some of you listening might as well. Like, if you pay attention, like, there's leagues out there like La Liga, which is a Spanish league. Guess what they're called? La Liga EA Sports. That is the name of the league. La Liga EA Sports. And then, like, the Premier League used to be the Barclays Premier League. Like this stuff is normal ish in professional sports. And I think it's just the fact that it's college and there's so much, like I said, tradition and history. We all are scared, like, to embrace it. And I'm not saying we're going to embrace it. We're still going to call it the Big 12, but I don't think the name part of it really matters that much.
Also, I didn't listen. I'm a fan of Pat McAfee. I'm a fan of the show. Obviously, a lot of people are, but he also gets a lot of criticism and a lot of hate. And I will say that he was talking about it on his show yesterday, and him and all the guys were making a lot of fun of it. Basically, like, insinuating, and it's kind of annoying because if you hear the conversation, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just like, oh yeah, the Big 12 is going to die just like all the other leagues, and it's like they're doing this not because they're afraid of dying. I think they've done things in the past couple years that have saved them. I think, again, if you look at the additions of UCF, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, that saved the Big 12.
They were already set up to be they were already set up to have sustainability.
Yeah.
Long term. But again, you have to, any move you can make to get yourself in an even better position to remain in the long term, you have to do.
Again, and I get it. And people can laugh and people can make fun of, and I get it. The SEC and Big Ten fans, it's nice. Again, if you're in one of those conferences, you're rolling in money. Like, there's no fear in the world. You're loving life. And I feel like there's a little bit of this pessimism amongst the outside media that really, again, they just want to see those conferences. They don't really care about anything else. Those are the conferences that get marketed. Okay. At the end of the day, those two conferences make up 36, 34 teams in college football. The ACC and the Big 12 make up, again, another 34 to 36. So if the Big 12 is going out and doing something like this to make a little bit of extra money to just, again, get a little bit closer, at the end of the day, and we'll talk again about private equity literally right now, but to get close enough to a Big 10, you're putting yourself on the same playing field when it comes to getting players, when it comes to NIL.
Right.
Whereas in 5 years, no offense, again, and it's not rocket science, if the Big 10 is making each school $75 million and the Big 12 and the ACC are each making about 35.
Yeah, times that by 10 years, 5 years, like, that's the amount of money that you're missing out on. Yep. To make upgrades to your facilities, all these things that matter. NIL, money to pay recruits, because eventually, this is why it's important, Sean. I think eventually we are going to get to a system to where the schools can start paying, and maybe I'm sure all this is happening under the table right now anyway, but paying directly, like, there's going to be an allotment that each school gets, I think, from the conferences, from the TV deals. I wouldn't surprise me as, hey, here's your pool to pay the players.
Nick, I think that's happened right now.
Yeah, like that.
We didn't read up. Like, we don't. Again, there's so much. College football changes every 2 seconds, so we don't read up on it. But that is what just got approved. Like, basically, the NIL collectives, it doesn't really matter. The schools are basically paying directly.
Exactly. So that's what's going to end up happening in the future here, and probably sooner rather than later, is the money that these schools are making off of the TV deals is they're going to start to be able to pay players through that sort of system. And so do you want to have a pool of, again, the whatever money that the Big 10 and SEC schools get, or do you want to have the pool of money that the Big 12 ACC schools get? You pick which one, and you tell me how far that's going to get you.
Yeah, and that's why, again, listen, you can look at Brett Yormark and you can give criticism. You can say whatever you feel that he's doing too much to change the landscape. Again, it's not like the Big 12 and Brett Yormark had their hands completely clean.
He didn't start this, though.
No, he didn't. But I'm saying I can understand how people can again, everybody likes to blame anybody. If anybody changes anything, it's the blame game. At the end of the day, he accepted the 4 schools from the Pac-12. The Pac-12 wasn't completely dead. He's got blood on his hands, just like the SEC's got blood on their hands. Everybody's got blood on their hands in this entire new landscape of college football. And again, in 2 years, we're going to be looking at college football completely different than we do today. We think it's ruined today. Just give it 2 years, and you're going to be completely shocked at what you see. And that's why I want to go to the next point. Okay, we talk about the naming rights. I think that's a small, minuscule. It's a surprisingly more so people are talking about the naming rights just because I think it's the thing you see every day, Nick. It's the thing.
It's easier to have a conversation about the naming rights.
Exactly. The private equity is a can of worms that I don't think people are ready to completely open up just yet. And if you think you're hearing about it now, just wait if it actually happens. You SEC fans, you Big Ten fans, ACC, it's going to come. So this is again from the same Action Network, Brett McMurphy article, where he talks about it. He says the league is also considering a private equity investment deal worth $800 million to $1 billion for 20% ownership of the Big 12, sources told the Action Network. CBS Sports identified Luxembourg-based CVC Capital Partners as the equity firm, and the partnership would give the conference access to CVC's investment services and clients. CVC is a global private equity giant that manages over $200 billion in investments worldwide. The firm made a presentation to the league recently at the Big 12 spring meetings in Dallas. One key factor for CVC is the upside in the Big 12's value in media rights. The Big 12's current rights deal is worth $2.3 billion in total dollars. The league is currently fourth in average annual value for the schools among the Power Four, behind the Big Ten, SEC, and ACC. Now, if I can find it, I don't know if they put it on here, but okay, so basically, the Big 12's media rights deal with Fox and ESPN, which ends in 2031, is worth $31.7 million per school. By comparison, Big Ten schools earn about $75 million annually following a new media rights deal agreement with Fox, CBS, and NBC. So, there's a lot there. $800 million to $1 billion. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. Before today, didn't know much about private equity. Nick didn't either. We had to look it up. And this is where the positives and the negatives come.
And by the way, we probably should both preface, at least I will. Listen, I am a sports writer for a living, and I prefer the topics that have to do with on the field and stuff that's easy to comp. This is so complex, so we're not experts by any means in this big business stuff, but we do our best to break it down. So let's preface it with that.
Well said.
And this was by far the last thing I was expecting today.
Yeah, again, I was ready to argue about UCF versus Florida's attendance. I was pure and ready. Okay, so private equity. Again, me and Nick are not going to act like we know what we're talking about to a degree. I would appreciate if you are really informative on the subject of private equity and all the ins and outs of that. Please drop it down below. But I think we did enough research on this particular instance and what could take place that is a good discussion enough where we can really understand and gives positives and negatives. My take is this. At least at the start, this would basically get the Big 12 even with the Big 10 in terms of money for each school, revenue into the Big 12 conference. Again, they're only selling 20%. That's the positive.
Right.
A school like a UCF would be making $65, $70, $75 million per year annually due to this. Here's the negative that, again, I've heard and I've read from multiple people online. Usually with private equity firms, the goal always is to make millions, not pennies. If I said that right, I'm sure that is a thing that is always said. It's always the goal with any business or any investment. The problem is with something like college football. I don't know how much of it is in the green. I'm sure a lot of, schools, a lot of conferences run in the red a majority of the time. So they said once the private equity joins or takes a certain percentage of a certain thing, the goal is always to cut back on certain finances to then be able to make profit. In college football, Nick, a lot of the money is going towards players that are on certain teams who may not be even playing for 2-3 years. And again, I might be completely wrong. Me and Nick might be completely wrong. I'm saying the positive right now is, at least right off the jump, there's no strings attached. They're taking a share of the Big 12 conference. They're giving schools a bunch more money than they're making now. The negative is we don't know what the ramifications will be as the years move along. We don't know how much money they're going to want to cut back. We don't know how much they're going to want to overtake the Big 12 conference. If you have 20%, you can always try and get more. We don't know what that factors in. There is a little bit of a fear that this could really ruin, the college football landscape. Now, this has been something that all the conferences have really been looking into over the last 18 months. I know you talked about with me earlier about the Florida State ordeal and how they hired an equity firm. So give your take. Again, this is really complex. I think we're going to find a lot more in the next coming months. I don't think this is a done deal by any means. But again, if I'm Brett Yormark and I'm like, okay, we're giving off 20% of our conference to make an extra 30 to 35 million per school, maybe even more than that, worth $1 billion. It's really hard to say, you know what, we're good. Because then you look at, okay, the SEC and the Big Ten are just these juggernauts. Now you kind of look at it differently. You say, the outlook is the Big 12 is on par with those conferences. So give your take. I give you the full floor to say whatever.
Yeah, this is it's a very slippery slope. Is I guess how I'll say it. Like, I think like you see the numbers and you do the math and everything, and it sounds great and everything because it's like more money. And I know that I just went on this whole spiel for the first 30 minutes of this podcast talking about it's a race to acquire as much money as you can and make as much revenue as you can, and I stand by that. But that doesn't change the fact that is private equity the best way to go about that? Because like I said, there's a slippery slope there because from what I've understood in my research of what's going on here, and I think you kind of touched on it. You touched on it there a little bit. If they deem certain parts, not, bringing in enough revenue that they'd like to see, they will sell off those parts. Essentially, right? And that's kind of the concern. It's like, yes, there's an agreement here, like, hey, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, but that could change over time. And you mentioned that it's a deal for what, 20%? Is that the correct
20%.
Number?
Yeah, 20%.
20% of the Big 12? Well, who's to say that couldn't rise in years down the line? What happens when it becomes 51%? I think these are all reasonable questions to ask. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm all for trying to bring in more revenue and put yourself in a spot for that. And like I said, Brett Yormark clearly knows way more about this business world than I do.
Yeah.
And to an extent, should I have trust in him because he hasn't steered the conference, I don't think, in a bad direction yet? Sure. I can say that. If it all works out, let's just say like best case scenario, it all works out. I mean, my goodness, this is a true game changer for this conference.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. And maybe that's part of this is, hey, the positives outweigh it so much, like the possible negatives, and we're okay with living in that land. Maybe so. But if the focus becomes not about putting the best teams out there and it becomes how can we build the cheapest teams that you're still going to pay to watch, if it comes to that,
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying becomes that slippery slope. And we just don't have the answers to those questions of how that's going to look.
And that's the fear. Now, there's a positive, I guess. And I looked up an athletic article because, again, Nick said it off the jump. We are not experts in this field. I'm assuming this is going to be a continued conversation over the next couple months, so I'm sure we will get really good at understanding this, just like every college football fan. When any of this stuff happens, you really kind of become smart in it, obviously. But I want to read this because also, Nick, I'm going to read a paragraph about like the House versus the NCAA settlement, which also kind of can give a little or shed a little light onto why this might be a thought process. But in regards to the private equity, sources describe the league's private equity discussions as preliminary and something that would have to be approved by the conference's board of directors. So again, I'm sure, to be completely honest, I'm sure that every single athletic director and chancellor, whoever, this is going to be something that takes place over months. I don't think they're going to be willing to just sign on the dotted line immediately. I think they want to make sure, just like Nick said, that this isn't something that you're just going to be cheapening out all of the teams just to, at the end of the day, put out a crap product to make more money. Right. The CVC's investment stake would be intended to better financially position the conference and its members ahead of its next media rights contract in 2031, with the belief that an anticipated increase in television revenue from the next deal would provide a long-term return on investment for the firm. The initial sense is that the CVC would collect its stake as an annual distribution in the future under a new media deal, similar to member schools, but those are all details that would be worked out if a partnership is pursued. CVC has invested in more than 130 companies and organizations worldwide. It also says that Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott once explored the idea of taking a private equity investment in 2019 for at least $500 million, but there wasn't enough support from the schools, and the league moved on from the idea. So it seems like, Nick, and again, I'm going to read the paragraph here in a second about basically the money that all of the schools are going to have to shell out each year in the next couple years. But it sounds like basically what the partnership is hoping, or what CVC is hoping, is by the time 2031 rolls around, the money that you're going to be making on your next TV deal is going to more than pay for our investment that we're going to be basically putting in. Is kind of what I'm assuming. Like, they're going to get paid, obviously. They're putting in $800 million to $1 billion. But what they're assuming is over time, their investment is going to grow, which in the landscape of college football now, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. But what they're doing is they're betting on the Big 12 and Brett Yormark, which I think says more about Brett Yormark than we're probably even giving enough credit for, even though we've mentioned his name a million times.
Yeah, I mean, Brett's been pretty aggressive since he's, taken over as Big 12 commissioner. So I don't think this should be as a shock to anybody. And in terms of all the stuff you kind of read down there and trying to ease some of the potential concerns with the private equity part, like, if you read like the article from the Athletic that you were going through there, and anticipating that they get the media rights increase in 2031, so in 7 years from now, is that would cover or provide a long-term return of investment for the CVC firm. And I guess the way I've interpreted that is, we talked about the whole thing about if they don't see things giving them revenue, that they could, sell those things off or put it into those things. If they have the assurance that they're getting the TV revenue money, then potentially they won't mess with some of those underperforming things in the conference. I'm trying to put this in the most basic of terms for people here. But obviously that would have to be like, if, in my opinion, if I'm making that deal, like I would want that a part of the deal. Like, hey, we have all this money, you come on, we're going to be in a even better position in 7 years for our next media rights deal. That'll cover anything else. I'd want that, make sure that's a part of the deal. And that way you reduce the amount of concern and potential issues that could come up with being in a part of a private equity.
And I think they're betting on the big, like if you're going and you're paying $1 billion, and I get this is the first time this has really happened when it comes to college football specifically. If you're saying I'm going to pay $800 million to $1 billion, I don't think people are just shoving out. I don't think these firms are just shoving out money to things that they probably don't believe are going to be profitable. I think they view it as the Big 12 will be profitable for us. Right. This is a good investment right now. And in the years down the line, there's 7 years. Again, I think me and you are fairly confident the Big 12 has done enough things and will do enough things to cement themselves for their future, to be that third conference.
Correct.
And to stay kind of right there. I think a firm like this is saying they believe that too. And I think Brett Yormark also has a lot to do with that specific thing.
Right. But I would agree there.
To kind of close, this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the House versus NCAA settlement and the schools paying directly. The Big 12's exploration of new additional revenue streams comes as athletic departments prepare for the added financial burden of the House versus NCAA settlement that, if approved, would result in annual withholdings from the NCAA for back payments, as well as direct revenue sharing with athletes moving forward, the latter of which is expected to cost schools as much as $20 to $25 million each year. So again, this has been talked about for months, and that's why a lot of people were nervous, because it's like, I don't know if a school like UCF can afford a $20 to $25 million payment. Right now, they're not even getting a full share from the Big 12 yet. They won't get a full share until 2026. So to say, all right, UCF, like you're in the Power 5 or the Power 4, this whole thing just happened. You're now going to have to pay athletes directly. You got the settlement for the back payment. So you need to shell out about $20 to $25 million annually. That's not including paying your player. It's paying your players, but doesn't, pay the cost of just running your buildings, a lot of the hidden costs that we don't know about. So for these smaller schools, and again, I'm not saying UCF is a small school. I get it. Like UCF's on the up and up when in terms of the outlook of college football, we all believe. But again, if you look at some of these schools that are in the SEC and Big Ten, I don't know if they can afford $20 to $25 million. I don't know if many of the schools in the Big 12 right now can afford $20 to $25 million annually. So this gives these teams a chance to say, we're going to give you this extra, $40 million of revenue and be able to continue operating. So again, that's something that a lot of people won't talk about, but they'll figure it out and say, out of that $40 million, half of it's going to basically just go to the players. And then we'll be able to run our facilities and do whatever we need to do. So it's very interesting. It's a very complex and interesting conversation.
It is. And I'm looking forward again that like I said, we're giving like our initial reaction and breaking this down like in real time here. So, I'm definitely looking forward to having a full week to chew on this and maybe find out some more stuff. I'm sure there's going to be some other info out here, but like I said at the beginning of the show, this is a very multi-layered conversation, and and I can't wait to dive into more. Well, actually, I'm not going to act like it's the most exciting thing in the world. I was about to say, I can't wait to dive into the private equity world over the next week to really learn about this, but it doesn't really sound exciting, but this is part of the college football world. So,
and to end, I don't want to make people scared, but I will say a lot of people that are in private equity right now said that if they get their hands on any conference, it's not going to be good. So I will look at the positive right now. And again, like Nick said, after we're filming
because
this,
like I'll just say it like right now. Like when I first read all this stuff, like I did the big thing where I saw the numbers and I went, oh, how are there any negatives to this? And then you read more and you do the real research and you go, yeah.
So again, we'll see. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot more. This is not agreed to yet. I am sure the athletic directors are going to be doing their due diligence over the next however many months, because it's a big decision to go this route. It would be a historic decision, but we will be covering it here. and we will kind of, again, we're filming this on the day this all dropped. This is obviously, you're getting this on a Friday. We're recording this yesterday. So
this came out like right before we were about to record.
Yeah, so no offense, we had to talk about it. So hopefully you got a good baseline of information from us, and hopefully in the next couple even days, I'm sure reporters are going to be all over this and trying to figure out as much as they humanly possibly can. So we'll be getting a lot more information on this as it comes out, and I'm sure I'm almost positive we will do another episode on this before the season starts, because again, that's just how it goes when stuff like this happens in college football. All right, Nick, any final thoughts before we head out?
Yeah, I mean, we covered most of it there, but I'll just say it's if you're still, holding on to the way things used to be, and I find myself guilty of that before, it's just not that way anymore in college football. It's just not. And the ultimate end goal, and this is a conversation for another day and a long one, to me, the ultimate end goal for college football is it needs to be its own entity, separate from every other sport, and God knows, away from the NCAA. So maybe we'll get there one day.
Yeah, I would tend to probably agree with that. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly appreciate it. I forgot to mention it off the top. We have a big announcement coming on Monday. If you're a big NCAA, or not the NCAA anymore, if you're a big College Football 25 fan, we have a couple of announcements that you definitely will want to know about. So please go over to my Twitter, at Sean M.R. Green, to get all of that information on Monday. It's really good stuff. And again, new stuff, exciting stuff coming to the channel very, very soon. So we're really excited here. Follow Nick, follow me on X, on Twitter. Please like, subscribe, comment, share. That's going to do it. A lot of stuff we went over this week. Exciting, but also very scary. Everybody, this has been Charged On, presented by Bet Online. We will see you next week.